at Big Feels Club, we usually do like monthly member talks that are pretty interactive, but for today, it's going to actually be more of a sit back and listen because these folks have a lot of wisdom to impart. So we're not going to do a Q&A, just partially because we realize on Wednesday we do not have time, given all of the things to get through. So let's get into questions. All righty. So firstly, I just wanted to talk to Amy about the alternatives to suicide approach. So the alternatives to suicide is a peer-based response. And just because we're saying a few jargon things, peer means people who have their own lived experience of crisis, distress, trauma, addiction, suicidality. There's a long list because people will kind of relate to these experiences in lots of different ways. So it's a peer-based response to supporting people who've either had suicidal attempts or who have had or have suicidal feelings, thoughts, experiences, and it was developed in a very grassroots way in 2008 from Western Massachusetts in the US. And so they run peer support groups, but on that subject. So Amy, can you tell us, going to one of these groups, how did you find out about it? And what made you want to go?
Sure. Is this all right? Am I loud enough? Cool. I haven't used a microphone many times, so just bear with me. Yeah, so I actually found out about Alt2Sue from more of a work perspective. So I was studying mental health on the side. As Anna said, I'm a software engineer, so yeah, it just seemed like a natural next step to go into mental health. So I found out about it and was interested just as someone who was looking at sort of alternatives and interested in the like non-conventional ways of looking at mental health. And then it wasn't until a little bit later on that I sort of had another experience. It had happened a few times where I went into a really sort of dark space and had this particular experience that made me think, maybe that's what I need myself, go to one of these groups. So I'll share that experience. I was in hospital, like a mental health ward, and pretty much had this experience where I was sitting in a room with a psychiatrist asking me questions, a couple of other people taking notes, very comfortable, situation. That's what you want when you're pretty distressed. And there was this moment where I said to him, I think I need to go home. I don't think this is the right place for me to get better. It's not the right environment for me to start feeling better. And he looked at me and said, I can't let you go home. I don't understand why you're feeling the way that you are. And if I can't figure it out, I think you'll kill yourself. And that really has stuck with me as, why does this guy that has just met me, has probably max half an hour to sit and talk to me right now, why is it his job to figure out why I'm in distress? How does he possibly think he's gonna figure it out? Like this huge thing that I've been working on myself for years. So I kind of came out of that thinking, I really want a space where I can talk about what I'm going through. Nobody's trying to figure me out or tell me what I need to do. I can just be honest and feel understood. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. So the first of these alternatives to suicide groups you went to was online.
Mm-hmm.
So can you take us back? You're sitting there, you found out about this thing, you're like about to log on. What are you like thinking? And what was that first sort of session like?
I think I was pretty nervous about it. I didn't know whether it would be useful. There was a part of me that was like, I'm not sure whether sitting in a room of people that are talking about suicide is necessarily going to be like, surely that'll make me feel worse. But I was at this point where I was pretty desperate. Like I was ready to try anything. And there was a part of also knowing that I could go along to this group. Part of Alt2Sue is that you can go along to these groups and there's an understanding that the crisis team's not going to be called, emergency services don't get called. So I knew that I could go along, give it a go. If it wasn't useful, it's not like having chosen to go, that there was a risk that the police would show up on my doorstep or something, which is something that's happened to me from asking for help in other ways. So yeah, it felt like low risk. I just wanted to give it a go. And then showing up to the group, it was on Zoom, but yeah, just the way that they started the group, the facilitators sort of introduced what to expect, the fact that they had lived experience as well. So it felt very much like we were all on the same level. And it was kind of the first time that I felt like I could talk about what was happening and people were just giving me the space to do that and not trying to solve anything or judge me for the way that I was experiencing this distress. Yeah.
Cool, thanks. And now you actually, since that, you've gone on to train in the alternatives to suicide approach and you run one of these groups. We're going to get back to that. So just hold your microphone. We're going to come back to you because I want to go back to, we've zoomed in on like Amy's individual experience of finding these things. And now we're kind of going to zoom right back to thinking about the early beginnings of some of how these things have come about. So I'm going to play kind of as an introduction a video, which is of, it's like 3 minutes long. It's of Mary. So Mary's probably going to feel awkward about this. And it's a beautiful short documentary made by a New Zealand filmmaker called Nikki Castle, who now lives in Australia. We need to go back to the start.
She answers.
There we go.
Impression of over-dramatisation, but with underlying gross psychological turmoil. Dresses unconventionally. Bastards. As a young woman, I spent 5 years in and out of psychiatric hospitals. This was one of the most intense and profound experiences of my life. But down the other end of the long polished corridor, others recorded their own version of my distress. The files were all about me, but I couldn't see me in them. 15th of August 1979. She is a very detached person.
And in this way, as of a schizoid
Eye
makeup.
contact, slow speech, and reflex.
She answers all questions.
Manic depressive illness with genetic basis.
Preoccupied with thoughts.
Mary,
Hopefully medication will break the chain.
it's almost as if she resents having to come into an interview and speak about herself.
He stared right through me. I kept thinking he could see into every corner of my mind. Every time I moved, the way I sat, where I put my hands, I thought would be used as evidence of my badly diseased mind.
My own pictures of madness came in the form of words and metaphors. At their most powerful, my words floated in from the blackness and passed through me onto paper. I made meaning, not in spite of my madness, but because of it. What I didn't know until I read these notes is how little regard they had for me as a human being in a desperate existential struggle. I'm glad I didn't know I was going to be the chair of an international network, advise the United Nations, or become a New Zealand Mental Health Commissioner. If I'd told a psychiatrist I was going to do these things, they would have upped my antipsychotics on the spot. They kept telling me I had an ongoing disability and needed to lower my horizons. I'm so glad they were wrong.
So I'm not sure if folks have come across anything like that before. I know when I first watched that film, I was like, whoa. But the reason why we wanted to play it was actually to give a context of things like peer support, alternative kind of ways of supporting each other actually came from this history of people trying to find alternative ways of supporting each other. And Graham's pointing at the slide and I don't. Oh, bring Mary back. So I wanted to ask Mary, we heard a bit about Amy's experience just now. I want to know, like, what was it like when this peer support model or approach was first establishing? What was going on? What was it like? And when was that? Oh no, we can't hear you.
Actually, I think there were some threads of peer support long before we started doing peer support. There are sort of records of it going back to the 19th century. And of course, in the alcohol area, peer support through the Alcoholics Anonymous started in 1937 or thereabouts. So it's a lot older than I am, although I am getting older. I think, but the other thing about peer support is that it's very much based on a natural relationship where people who have similar experiences, problems or conditions find common ground with each other and mutuality. And I would have to say that my first experience of peer support was in the ladies' dormitory in the hospital I was in, where we would just naturally support each other. When in fact the nurses were down in the lounge doing their knitting or doing their notes, we would be there for each other. And that was my first experience of peer support, even though we didn't have a name for it, and it wasn't a concept that we understood in a formal sense.
Yeah, and to give some, I feel like I have a similar story about how I came across peer support. Did not know what it was. And to give some kind of backstory, like peer support has now become much more established, and I would say establishing, and is something that is now kind of becoming funded by governments at all kind of levels, and growing, not just in Australia, also in New Zealand, much further beyond. I want to actually go now to you, Heather. So Heather is the CEO of Shark, the Self-Help Addiction Resource Centre. So Shark's a charity and it supports over 9,000 individuals as well as families every year to help people to help themselves recover from addiction. It's led and run by people with lived experience of addiction and recovery, and runs residential programs that people stay in for. Actually, like I was looking at your 25-year annual report, the average length of stay in these programs is about 8 months, but people will stay in these programs for over a year, quite a long time. So like quite extensive support and relationships that people build up as part of these programs. And it's one of like a few key lived experience organisations in Victoria that's kind of becoming a key part of the changes that are happening in Victoria. So that's just some background on Shark. But Heather, my question to you is that you are now the CEO, but you started your connection with Shark as a client. Can you tell us how the hell that all happened?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I was actually a registered nurse and I found myself in a very distressed state, and to manage my distress, I found substances that blocked my emotional life.
My phone is slightly closer to your face.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really, really wanted to find something that would help, and I went and saw doctors and I went and saw psychiatrists. I spent fortunes on different fancy rehabs, and I was really told the message in those days was, with your condition, there's about 6% of people who achieve stability with the right treatment. And, you know, I was just really horrified by that. I've always been an ambitious kind of kid, like I was a sunny kid. I always learnt how to create a space where the light could come in, you know, and I'm thinking, well, what are you telling? I'm coming to you in this really extreme tender space, and you're telling me that 6% of folk like me have a chance of living some kind of normal life. And I was obviously not nursing by that time, because that would have been quite dangerous, and I knew that for the public health. So I met a group of people who were in the same space as me, and we didn't actually call it drugs or alcohol or psychological distress. We were in distress. We'd looked for places to go to get some shelter from the storm. And strangely enough, by almost process of elimination, we became aware of what a difference it made to how we felt when we came together. So that was the beginning of this idea of, you know, none of us knew what peer support meant, but, you know, what we knew was that everything that we'd tried hadn't actually been helpful for our internal lives. And if our internal lives and our balance didn't feel right, we were going to reach out for something to rebalance. And for us, it was substances. And, you know, so we found that incredibly, coming together was an amazing way of getting some comfort. And, you know, we came to, did you ask me how we got to where we got to?
I want to know, how did you find Shark?
Yes.
And then how did you become the CEO?
Yeah, I know. Well, you just wait, and you just tell me when you want me to stop. But so this became Shark. So this group of people sitting around drinking coffee, and we just decided that we needed to live together, and we needed to try to find some way of using the connection that happened when we were together to ease our distress. And so we just went and knocked on doors of rich philanthropies, and they gave us a couple of houses. You know, that they gave us.
Heather's got lots of stories like this, just by the way.
But they gave us a couple of houses, and one's still current in South Yarra now. And they gave us a couple of houses, and they said, "You guys are really quaint. Don't burn anything down, but you can use our house, use the houses, and we don't want the police coming. They're your houses for 5 years." So that was the beginning of Shark. That was back in mid-80s. So we just kept supporting each other, and as we became more comforted and were able to move more out into an external space, the other people started to come and live in the houses, and it was quite extraordinary. And then those who would exit the houses, we realized that there was something about giving back's a bit boring to me, because it sounds like an equation. What we found was that being in connection with others who wanted just to be heard was a really mutually beneficial process. So yeah, that I was a client in Shark, and I stayed in the kind of Shark River for many years. I went back to work. I got a couple of postgrads in addiction and organisational management and Australian Institute of Company Directorship, darling. But I set up this nurses program to help nurses who were experiencing distress or substance misuse. And I just was in this wave of, how can we meet each other in distress differently? And it wasn't there's this way or that, or anybody's wrong or anybody's right. It was, what's the alternative creative space we can create when we walk together? And I often think it's less me, less you, more us. And that's really magic, you know, that sort of stuff. So I know you're going to ask me another question later about banners.
I'm going to ask you another question. We're going to come back to it. We're going to come back to it now.
Okay, so I promise I won't go there. So that was 29 years ago. And my life journey just kept kind of being drawn to connection and mutuality and understanding people have different worldviews and what comfort is for people like me, what comfort feels like. And Shark now has grown and grown and grown and grown. Some government money, some non-government money. We never try to have more government money than philanthropy, because then we're a little more beholden to the prescriptive kind of way of operating. Although we're extremely grateful we do get government money, but we do try to keep the balance. So client, 29 years ago, some study, just always staying in the space. And I remember I went on the Shark board and I was writing the PD for the CEO, and I had a really cushy job. I loved it. You know, it was really good. I was doing good stuff. And as I was writing it, in my heart came this knowing that I was actually writing my own job. And all my friends just said, no, don't do it. It'll be really hard. Stay where you are. And, you know, that was 15 years ago. And I did write my own job description. And I've been in the Shark River now as the CEO for 15 years. And it's been the most extraordinary, humbling, energizing experience of my life. And I'm at the end of that time now with Shark in some ways. But yeah, client, and just one other thing there, my PD said, and I don't think that many other people.
By PD, position description is what we're talking about, yeah.
Thank you. My job description for CEO said that I had to have lived experience of long-term psychological distress or using substances, and a stable change period where I, you know, obviously I couldn't have been CEO the way I was 29 years ago. So yeah, extraordinary.
Amazing.
Client to CEO. I love it.
You don't hear that many stories like that, I reckon, particularly not where you wrote your own job description. Also, I just wanted to pick up on a couple, like just one word that Heather talked about, which was this word called mutuality, which I feel like doesn't get talked about that much in kind of general conversation, but that gets talked about a lot in the peer support space, which basically means how do we try and have an equal relationship with each other? And the difference is it's different to traditional service type relationships, which I'm not saying it's not possible. It is just, there's a lot more to kind of try and manage. So I suppose I just say in peer support, like that's often one of the key things we focus on is how do we actually try and be equal partners in this relationship that we're trying to have. Okay, so I'm just noticing the time. So I'm going to take us to Amy, and I want to ask you about alternatives to suicide. Now you run one of these groups online. Can you tell us a bit about what is it like to run them?
Sure. So I guess like I did training to become a facilitator of these groups, and there are some aspects of facilitating where, you know, I've got like responsibilities, but really the way that they're run, I'm turning up not just as someone that's there to run a group and like, you know, do something for other people. It's also for me, right? So I turn up and I say, I have a lived experience. I'm here as a peer, and I might share stuff that's going on for me as well. So part of starting up this group was not just that I thought this is a great thing that other people need. It was because I needed it and there weren't enough of them. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Well, one thing that I feel like I've heard you talk about is also that some people might expect that in these groups, people talk about suicide a lot, but you go.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess that's what I thought it was going to be like as well, first showing up. And it's something that then, yeah, I was slightly concerned about starting my own group, that I'd be taking home a lot of stuff with me from these groups, and I'd feel, you know, responsible for the people that were showing up or something. But it really ends up being a space where, because suicide isn't this like taboo topic, once it's sort of out there that, you know, people in this room, in this space are experiencing these things, that's not really the issue that needs to be talked about. It's the, what is it that's happening that's making these people, or, personally, what is it that's happening that makes me want to be dead? Like that's much more important than this just like focusing on suicide. So yeah, most groups, there isn't actually that much talk about suicide. It's often about finding meaning in your life, or often actually a lot of discussion about the ways in which the mental health system has Do I need to put words down?
I feel like the expression
Yeah.
says a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I've done the Alternatives to Suicide training. It was at Shark. Wow, small world. It is a really small world in this world. And one thing that I thought was interesting about what one of the facilitators of that training said was that people don't stop having suicidal thoughts, they stop talking about them often. And so, and also that thing that you said around how it can become taboo, I feel like it's like this, like, don't think about pink elephants thing of like, if you feel like it's not actually a space where you can talk freely about these things, then it becomes like much bigger in everyone's mind and kind of scarier. So it is this interesting thing that when it's a space where that is allowed, it becomes like, it actually becomes less of a focus, which I found really interesting. And just to give like a tiny bit more sort of context, like I've done like a few years of hospital programs, and some programs before you go into them, you have to sign a contract, for instance, that you won't make friends in these programs, or that you won't date anyone in these programs, or that you won't, like some of them say you won't try and kill yourself, or you won't, like, which are quite an interesting way of sort of setting up a relationship with how you would move into a space. And like there's certain things you're not allowed to say. And look, we could have like a 7-hour-long conversation about all of that and why all those things are there and the benefits and pros and cons and all that. More just to say, like, it's quite a different space in terms of that allowance, I suppose, is what I would say. And my last question on this is, how do I access it from Melbourne?
So actually, one good thing to come out of COVID is that all of the groups at the moment, to my knowledge, maybe there's one in Perth that's in person, but all of them are online. So even the Canberra group, we've stopped calling it the Canberra group actually, because it's just sort of open to everyone. So if you go to the Alt to Sue New South Wales website, there's a whole list of Zoom groups that anyone in Australia can go to. Technically anyone in the world, if you want to get up at the time that it's on. And you don't have to register or anything. It's not like you have to be referred, or you don't even have to give your real name when you show up. It's really just like click on the link and show up. So yeah, Alt to Sue New South Wales website is a good one to look at, and also Discharged in WA. Probably not relevant to anyone here, but still, yeah.
And we've got a link that we'll show at the end about that. Okay, so moving on to Heather about Shark. Oh my gosh, I drank a Coke beforehand way too quickly. Can you give us, okay, so say I'm a young person, and I'm struggling with an addiction issue, maybe some other stuff is going on in my life. I come to Shark. What happens and how might that be different, or just what happens?
Am I off mute?
We can hear your mic's it's just quieter. Yeah.
That makes me feel a bigger person. There. A young person. Look, I think one of the differences for us is we don't have inclusion and exclusion criteria. And we did a big analysis of organisations in Victoria, and all of them had longer why you can't come in and talk to us than they had why you can. And that's really the pivotal kind of thing that we've worked to change at Shark. So we were always saying come in anyway, but what we do is we don't put ourselves up as the expert, and we don't and we have a big open door, and we have some really nice space to sit around. And so a young person who might come in to Shark would have a conversation with somebody. Like, you actually don't have to make an appointment. Somebody in the building will find time to have a conversation with you. And very much
And the building is filled with everyone's got lived experience in the building, just to make that clear.
Yeah. So, and when we talk about young people, I know this has got a young person's focus, but we also have old person's focus, and our oldest client is 76 currently. So we have 64 beds across Victoria. But back to the meeting of a person, any person, not just a young person, we have this kind of intrinsic valuing of their story. And, you know, that is a really critical part. The story that they want to share with us has to be strategically enabled. Like, people in distress don't come in and want to be put in an assessment room and have people firing questions about how they feel. Do they want to kill themselves? What's their risk factor? K10. We have conversations. And if we think that we've got something that can be offered up and invited, that's what we do. If we feel that we haven't, and the young person feels that we haven't, then what we do is we don't kind of go, well, you're no longer part of us. You actually became part of us when you walked in the door. So we will support that journey into another realm. It may be a community support. It may be just connecting them with a friend to come and meet them at Shark, or it may be actually bringing them into one of our housing programs. Sometimes when, you know, we're not an acute service, but because we're an open service, we often get people in acute state of distress walk through our door. We've heard Shark kind of helps people like us out. And so what we'll do in that case, it's about, for us, about how can we, what we do, enable you to be supportable with what we've got. Like, what do you need from us? And having that very clear conversation. And if it is acute arousal and somebody does want a more intensive, God knows why you would, but people do sometimes need some kind of psychiatric intervention, and, you know, we're not saying that's wrong, then we go with them where they need to go. So we don't have an exclusion criteria from connecting with us.
So I want to bring up a slide. Can you bring up the slide, Sam? Oh my gosh, I had a clicker, but I don't know where it went. Okay. This is like just some pictures from actually the slide 25-year annual report. If you want to know about Shark, actually, that's a really good read. And the reason why I'd say that is because Shark does a lot of different things. So they run residential support programs. This canoe trip is from like one of the trips that the resis, as they get called, went on. This is kind of just a photo of sort of, there's a lot of day programs, peer support programs. And then on the right is just kind of just to show there's actually lots of other stuff Shark does. So Shark has really become this kind of umbrella for a number of other smaller grassroots organizations that kind of established and then have come underneath. So for instance, there's Three Sides of the Coin, which is a theatre troupe that does work around gambling addiction. And there's the Family Drug Gambling Helpline, which is a 24-hour helpline. They get thousands of calls each year from families of folks who are struggling with addiction stuff. They have peers that work in the drug courts. Like, there's lots of different things that Shark does. So I just kind of want to acknowledge that. And one thing, Heather, that I want you to do is I want you to tell us about how the Family Drug Helpline started. Do you want that photo?
Yes. So it's a little bit attached to when we got the two houses. It's the same paradigm. Like, sometimes you've got to join arms and go and ask clearly about what you want. And one of the things about Shark is in every program area, it's been organically triggered. It's been thought about, and people who are actually in need are the ones that have come together to think of what could be a solution, and then got the champions that they've needed to help mobilise the mechanisms that need to make it happen. And this is a great, after many years of families digging gardens in the houses that we ran for their kids or their husbands or their daughters, the families came to us and said, something weird's going on here. Like, how come people are getting well with this peer support, this mutual model that you use? And what they then said was, we recognise there's distress in our family units that is attached to our young person, or not such a young person in my case, but there's something magic about the connection that happens, and we're feeling it digging the gardens where our young people live together. And so we thought, well, why don't we mobilise something? Why don't we get together?
Do something for families, yeah.
Do something for families. And so the picture is, like, we go a bit far sometimes. This is probably a bit far.
Words can be poison.
Yeah. This was really an anti-stigma campaign as well. So, and this was one part of it. But it was, and we did happen to end up on Parliament House steps. And we had lots of champions in media, lots of champions at high political levels, because everybody's got somebody who feels distress at some time. And if we can invite them into a conversation, they actually become allies. So we, just as we got the 2 houses 29, 30 years ago, we got the beginnings of funding for family drug help.
And from my understanding, you guys just kept showing up on Parliament steps like this.
We did it 4 times.
Yeah. And then over on the right is the Premier, Steve Bracks, at the time, at the opening of the family drug help in 2001. So that was kind of the first part of their family program. So like, really just to draw the connection between like grassroots activism is a really core part of how Shark has established what it's doing.
If I do this in 1 sentence, can I have 1 sentence? So it's hard to do it in 1 sentence, but I'm going to try.
Give it a go, Heb.
Most services are prescribed, and they're boxes of services that best practice and evidence kind of points to fixes folks. And so what we made a decision to do 30 years ago was we were going to be the folks that drew our own boxes, and that if that meant that we couldn't, get as much money as we needed at whatever time, we were just going to keep hanging in there and trying. And so all of Shark's programs, which is 5 now, have all grown from the voice of the people that need the services. And I find that truly extraordinary. There's be some really politically correct name for that now, but actually simply it is organically created from the voice of the folks who need the services. I told you it was only 1 sentence.
That was kind of 1 sentence. Okay, and the other thing I'll just say is that to find out about Shark, the services they have, you can go to their website. We'll put it up at the end, but like they've got a phone line website. You can check them out that way. Now I want to move on to Mary. So can we get Mary back? And I wanted to ask, Mary, you've been around for a while and you've seen how peer support has shifted, including being the mental health commissioner from 2000 to 2007. How do you think that peer support has shifted since then? And how do you see that playing out in Victoria right now?
Right, so yeah, in New Zealand, peer support was first mentioned in a government policy document in 1996. And I don't think there was I think there was a bit of scepticism. I don't think people really understood what peer support was. There was obviously, it really amuses me that, people who run the mental health system often say, well, where's the evidence for peer support and all these things? Or where's the evidence for recovery as an approach? And half the things they do every day don't have an evidence base or have evidence that's against it, like acute inpatient units do not have an evidence base. It's just that people have been putting people in hospital forever, so they don't demand an evidence base. And so you've got to get up against this barrier that there's no evidence, when in fact actually there is good evidence for peer support. It's been pretty well researched. I guess over the years there's sort of a gradual acceptance that peer support should be a core part of the offerings in the mental health services. But while there's been a lot of rhetoric about it, the funding hasn't followed, and there hasn't been opportunities for the growth of this workforce. And I guess from a New Zealand perspective, I've been very frustrated about that. And look, it's a tiny workforce still in Victoria, but the Royal Commission gives us a sort of unprecedented opportunity to grow this workforce and to grow these opportunities, not just in the paid way, but to grow just kind of community networks like we've been hearing about today as well, where people get together to support each other.
Thanks for that, Mary. So yeah, there is actually not that many peer support workers in Victoria. The context I'd give is just so the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system, the final report got handed down. Oh my gosh, pandemic, I'm losing track of which years are which. I'm pretty sure it was last year. And a core part of the new community model is peer support. And I'm going to get Mary in a sec. And Sam, would you be able to bring up the slides again with Mary, if that's all right? Of some of the other things that were recommended that I'm going to get Mary to speak to, because she's in her new role as the Director of Lived Experience in the Victorian Government. She's kind of in charge of making them happen, which is potentially a little bit scary. I would be scared if it was me, but Mary's a lot more powerful than me. Can we go? I can't get to the next slide. Can you get to the next slide? There we go. Here we are. So I just wanted to ask you about some of these, Mary, that are coming. This is for context, this is a picture of Tupuake, which on Wednesday we had Avril Hunt, who actually runs this service. It's your respite in New Zealand. The reason why I put up some photos is just to show quickly, a picture tells 1,000 words of how this is not a hospital. But Mary, can you just talk a little bit about what's coming to Victoria in terms of things like the peer respite, and what is the vision for Victoria as part of that?
Yeah, so look, a peer respite is obviously a peer-led service where people stay. We call people guests in peer respite. We don't call them clients or consumers. And they go into a small, intimate, home-like environment. And one of the important values about this environment is that it's a non-coercive environment where you would have a sense if there's a risk that you would do shared risk-taking, you would negotiate risk rather than have a psychiatrist make a determination about that. The peer supporters are on the staff and the management. And the ones in New Zealand, and most of them, unfortunately, they're not, you can't just walk into one. You have to go through you have to be assessed through the mental health service And they do have visiting clinical teams coming in to support people from that side of things. The great thing about these peer-run respite services is that there's huge satisfaction. People have a great experience in them. And not only the people who are guests in them, but the people who are working in them. And if you compare those experiences to an acute inpatient ward, again, the people who work there and the people who stay there have very difficult experiences, especially the people who stay there or who are, what they call patients. So these are great places, and we need to expand them. The other thing about these places is that there's been research done on the kinds of outcomes that people have when they've stayed in these places, and they're equal to or better than the outcomes that you would get from an acute inpatient unit. And of course, one of the things that we spare people in these environments is the trauma that often happens in the inpatient setting. The trauma of being locked in, of seeing a lot of other people in various states of distress, the trauma of being put in seclusion and restraints, or of feeling that no one understands you or will listen to you. And obviously these places are very different in that respect, and people have a different experience. Another thing to say about peer respite places is that the clinical worldview gets worried about, about risk, and their approach to risk is put people under the Act, subdue them with medication, and lock them into acute inpatient wards. One of the really interesting things about these peer respite places in New Zealand is that there's been very, very few incidents where there's been aggression, any dangerous behaviour, suicidal behaviour, or anything like that. Much lower than you would get in an acute inpatient setting. So that's just a little bit about that. And of course, there is a peer respite being set up in Victoria. This came out of a recommendation from the Royal Commission. But we don't want one, we want many. So this is just the start. And the peer respite in Victoria is going to be very much based on the model that I've been describing in New Zealand.
I have so many. I just want to clap that we're going to get them all over Victoria. There's a couple of things I just want to kind of say something to, actually quite a few things that you said in there, Mary. So one thing people don't know around the idea of a non-coercive environment. So when I first went into hospital, one of the first things I was told is if you self-harm in here, you will be kicked out. So that's what those kinds of things look like. And in terms of safety, that didn't feel like, I didn't feel like, I felt scared, to be honest, because there was a whole ream of other questions, but that's the one that I think of the most about that. And then, so next time that I was in a space of crisis, I did not want to go back to hospital because I was like, that is not the place that's going to fix this. And I didn't have anywhere else to go as another option. I remember trying to go to, there was a prevention and recovery centre, which is sort of kind of nicer down the line. It was 200 metres from my house and I could not get into it because of the referrals process. So anyway, luckily I have a partner who's self-employed. We had a friend who had a house on a commune in the country that was free. So we went there, and that was my version of a peer respite was I went, oh my God, I'm going to get emotional. We called it the hospiday, a hospital holiday, which was we went there and it was lots of really big conversations with each other. We made music, we went for walks, like a very different kind of experience. It did not fix it, but it did, like it was a safe space to have that experience. And I have a lot of people over the years who've asked me like, why when I'm freaking out, isn't there a nice farm that I can go to with people that I can talk to? And for me, I'm like, I want chats on tap. So this idea of a place where you can go and there will be people there who have a level of understanding that you can talk to is like, wow, what a kind of world apart. So anyway, that the other thing I'd say around the satisfaction thing is there's a story from Piripono, which is one of the peer respites in New Zealand, that some folks who stayed there as guests and were also nurses liked the service so much that they quit their jobs to go work there, which I think is like a very telling story of the kinds of environments these are. Yes, and the only other thing I'd just explain around, because Mary just mentioned the Act. The Act is basically a legal framework in which you can do involuntary treatment in Victoria, and then there's one for each state in Australia. So like that's, some people might not know that context. Cool, awesome. And the other thing I was going to ask you, Mary, is just is there a way that folks can stay up to date with the kind of progress on this, or when will these things when will they exist, if we know?
Right.
Question.
Yeah,
Can't answer, and if you can't, that's
there's a I'm just trying to think what the best email address. People can contact me at the Department of Health, and I could I don't know what the best way of saying but maybe through Big Fields you could get my email address. So we have the peer-led residential service, or the respite service. That is underway, and we think we'll have something open by the end of 2023. We're also doing a lot of work on the development of a lived experience workforces, and that, you know, the biggest group in that workforce is peer supporters, but there's also other roles. There's people who give advice to services. There's researchers. That, you know, we want to get more people with lived experience into management, and so on. We're developing a digital platform for people with lived experience in Victoria. We're also starting work with Vimiac and Shark on the development of a lived experience development and delivery agency for Victoria. Again, we're setting up family and carer centres in 8 of them across Victoria. We're expanding advocacy for people who are at risk of going under the Mental Health Act, the Compulsory Treatment Act, or who are under it. And one of the key things that has happened so far is that we now have a lived experience branch in the Department of Health, in the division, the Mental Health and Wellbeing division, and that is a first for the public service anywhere in Australia and New Zealand, I think. So that's just a little bit about what's happening. There's an awful lot going on at the moment.
I feel like people came for a mental health talk and it's like actually a secret job fair. So if you're like looking for a different career path, like here's a way to go. There's lots happening and we need more people.
We certainly do. So I really encourage people who are interested in coming into this area to get in touch with Big Phil's or myself or something, and we can steer you in whatever direction you want to go in.
Can I just say also the Shark website has got, we've always got jobs in the lived experience space. So, I mean, I very rarely see no employment offer on our website. So, and we do a lot of training of volunteers and a lot of training of peer workers and peer advocates. So have a look on our website too.
Nice. Also, the other thing I'd just say is that Big Feels Club, if you sign up to the newsletter, we put out a newsletter every couple of weeks, but we're always talking about this stuff. So if you kind of want to find an email newsletter that you can sign up to where you'll stay abreast of some of the huge amount of work that's coming through, you can find that. So I want to go to just a really last question before we wrap up, which is, we're talking about responses to people in crisis that are really community driven today. I think that's been super obvious in how we've talked about it. Oh, you want us to finish? She does. That's fine. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. Alrighty. Well, we can. It was going to be a question about risk, but I feel like actually you guys covered it. Yeah. Awesome. Graham's saying we covered it, so I feel like now I can.
And anyway, they'd never get us out if we started
yeah,
on
if we started talking about that, we'd never leave. Okay, so I just want to finish up by saying that this is where you can find some of this stuff. Ooh, Mary's in the way. So Alternatives to Suicide. This is their website. Amy actually wrote a piece for Big Feels Club about her experience. So if you go to bigfeels.club, it's one of the pieces that's on the homepage. It's called Alternatives to Suicide. It'll be pretty obvious. And then the Self-Help Addiction Resource Centre, Shark, is shark.org.au. So just kind of want to shout out those ones as well. Oh, I feel like we've gone through a lot today. I want to actually thank you folks. Amy came from Canberra for this. Really appreciate you coming down. Mary is, well, everyone's busy, but like Mary's zooming in from New Zealand and she's taking on a very stressful job. Heather's also got a stressful job. So I just want to thank all of you for all the wisdom. I feel like we only just scratched the surface. We could probably be here all day talking about the wisdom, because there's a lot of complexity to this work and how it's emerging across, I'd say, not just Victoria, not just Australia, but also the world. So I just want to finish. Oh. There we go. Okay, so I just want to say after this, some of you might have signed up to, we're going to have a workshop with Gorky, who's an awesome artist, cartoonist, amazing person, and dear friend of mine. So stick around for that. But what it means is once we finish, you're going to have to leave. So because we're using the same space. And yeah, come find us at bigfields.club. Please do check out this awesome exhibition that's going on out here. And the last thing I'd say is just that, as I said at the top, like some of this might be new, some of it can like really make you reflect on some of your own experiences in a way that's not like nice, I suppose. So I just say, you know, this can bring up some stuff. Definitely look after yourself, and just kind of want to signpost all those resources that many of you will have heard of. We've got this one which you can QR code, or you can go to bigfields.club. /need to talk. And we also have a 2-question survey. So if you want to fill that out, this 2-question survey, that would be amazing for us, because it helps us work out what's useful, what we should do, don't do, all that kind of business. But I want to just end by saying thank you so much to everyone for coming out on a Saturday to talk about some like pretty nerdy mental health stuff. It's my kind of jam, and I'm glad to see it's other people's kind of jam. And thank you very much to Science Gallery for helping us put this on. Jasmeet, who's been amazing in helping us get this all up behind the scenes. Sam, who's been over there, just quietly making things happen like the video. But particularly thank you to our amazing panelists for today. All righty.